30. We do have one item today on the agenda that is a public hearing. So I would like to move that we alter the agenda, raise item 2D to discuss the changing of the parcels at 651-0031, 00459, and 00461 from R2, one family and two family residential zoning district to O office district. May I have a second?
I second that.
Ms. Brown, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
So that was to amend the agenda.
Yes.
Can we call it?
Okay. Would now like to open the public hearing. Anybody who would like to be speaking at today's hearing, please stand, raise your right hand. Ms. Town will swear you in.
If you're going to speak, you need sworn in. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
All right. We will begin with those who would like to speak in favor of the amendment. Would anybody like to speak in favor of the amendment? Yes, sir. Please state your name.
All right, Jeff Reichard. I am the applicant and do a lot of the construction work for New City over the last 6-7 years. And so really what we're trying to do is bring their lot into compliance. It's a R2 non-conforming use. Sharpsburg, SNC, Norwood, Church, those are all currently office use. And the plan is to build an addition onto the building. I have some renderings. I don't know if they're really relevant to the zoning portion of it, but if you'd like to see them, I can show them to you. But yeah, it's really just to bring it in compliance with the rest of the similar uses on the block. So, any questions?
I'd like to see the renderings, please.
Okay. So we have a couple of different things here. The first one is, it's not complete. It's a project we're working on with Norwood Schools and SNC Norwood to do a whole kind of block redevelopment. So this is New City Church here. What it would do would be kind of tie all three properties together for traffic flow, which would improve for the schools. And then also create their playground in a much nicer community space with, there's lots of different ideas for different types of plantings, things like that for kids to grow plants, outdoor classroom type stuff. So that is all in development. So that's just kind of part of that. The rendering for the church is right here.
Wow.
So as you can see, it's a nice addition that complements the style of church. It's not out of character. And then these are just floor plans. Probably a little more detail you want to see, but you're welcome. I can bring them up to you if you want.
That's fine. The outside's great.
Okay. Any other questions?
Any further questions?
I do have questions. Why do you feel the need to move from R2 to office at this point? Since everything, you're fine with R2.
Honestly, it was recommended to us by building department, or from Mark Reeves and Mike Skelly, just from the perspective of setbacks and things like that, and I think parking. Does that make sense?
It was primarily setbacks in terms of the process. So Mark Reeves and myself met with the church officials and Mr. Reichert probably about 3 months ago.
Yeah.
So, and I think we were invited or approached. I guess you had already started to work on the designs.
Correct.
And I believe there was probably initially discussions with yourself and Mark and looking at the process, the building footprint, et cetera. So at that point, I think there was probably some discussion saying, have you considered at least rezoning the property for office? which is the rest of the surrounding area to the east and to the southeast. And the reason being, so for the church right now, it's an existing use. Churches are permitted as a conditional use. And essentially, for any sort of further development, the provisions wouldn't allow for the siting, with the exception of going through individual kind of unique dimensional variances for that. So essentially, I think that's what drove the interest. And I think you guys kind of mulled it over. I assume you looked at the zoning ordinance and then felt with regards to the overall process as to what would make sense for the development. So I can provide a handout. It's more of like an analysis of the two zones, if that, would help you. Essentially, I have it right here. It provides at least a look in terms of the zoning, et cetera. But beyond that, it was more speaking with the landowners as to, what is their long-term plans, how it fits with the zoning, and what would make sense.
So I guess my question is, what happens if the church sells? What happens then? Because then we're stuck with, it could be almost anything at that point. And that's a prominent street. There's residents who live there. There's beautiful homes. I just don't know if that would be that's a wise solution. That's my concern.
I mean, I would say it's bringing it into compliance with other properties on that street where you have the same risk. But, I mean, this church is committed to this community. Their model is to not grow and move somewhere else. Their model is to grow and then plant another church somewhere else where they, a whole nother different group of people. So it's never going to be a mega church. It's going to move somewhere to a bigger facility. It's always going to be here. But, I mean, you're right. 100 years from now, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we could what if forever, but.
Yeah. But we could also be opening up Pandora's box by doing this.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just my only concern.
I
As
mean,
a
if you
resident.
wanted to put some conditions on it that, it's only office while New City Church owns it or something, we don't have any objection to that. I mean, New City wants to make the community happy, and that's the bottom line. So, we're open to options and conditions.
And I think that your church looks beautiful. You've always maintained it's an asset. But I do have some concerns about it.
No, I understand. When New City bought that building, the roof was caving in spaces, so it pretty much saved the church. And I'm their contractor. I'm not a member of the church, but just as sort of an observer of that, I mean, they are committed to that site and doing what's great. I mean, this whole community plan for the block, it's all about community focus because they don't really gain a whole lot from doing this other than creating a nicer block for people to enjoy. So,
If I could ask Mike a question, excuse me, you did say you have made a comparison of the R2 and O. What is, I'm really wondering about the setback on the side of the residence on the north side. What would it be if it stayed R2? And what will it be if it's office? And since this is a public hearing, I assume they were notified.
Yes, sir.
Okay, because that's,
The-
and
Yes.
I don't know who even lives there. I know it's as you're facing the church, it's on the left side, that residence.
So just for the record, there was a newspaper article, or a notice put in the newspaper, and the residents within 200 feet were notified,
Okay, so they definitely would have been notified.
and they're here,
Okay,
some of them.
okay. Well, but you gave me the information, I got to
Well,
study
correct,
it.
yeah, but I can just give you the verbal synopsis. So
That'd be
the
great.
church is situated on the northwest corner, essentially yellow on the right side, which depicts the R2 zone. Everything else in orange is office. And then it's also, at least the property they own is on the left side, mapped in red. The second page, I prepared like a side-by-side comparison of the R2 zone and then the office zone. And without drilling down too far near the top, you can see, a front setback would be 25 feet, the office would be 0. What is the maximum that they have? That's really not applicable for the R2 zone. For the office, because we're trying to achieve buildings that are close to the streetscape or, the right of way, that's 10 feet. And then you go down and you can see sometimes it's 8 feet compared to 0, 30 feet compared to 0 for various things. So definitely the R2 is more restrictive in terms of the siting versus the office zone for this case.
Which you would assume it would be, since it's abutting residences. Because it's in an R2 zone.
Correct, but
Okay,
again.
you answered my question,
Okay.
and this is very good information. So it's both a frontage and a side condition that allows the office to have much more lenient setbacks.
Yeah, and I think in the proposal, and we have the applicant designer here, I believe they're showing, is that 32-foot
On the
from
front,
floral?
that's a harder question because of the public right-of-way is so wide there.
Okay.
But I can tell you it does not come out any farther than the existing building.
So plus or minus the existing building. I mean, that's a good answer. That answer my question. What about the side setback?
It's drawn in at a little over 10 feet.
So you're in at 10.
That's what the office allows.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for Mr. Reichard?
Parking differences between an R2 and an office, and this is really good work, Mike. Thanks for doing this. Number of spaces, do you have that on this recap?
I do not, so,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I can provide that at a subsequent meeting.
We put in for a zoning review with Dan Bly of assuming if this zone change goes through and it's 4 spaces per seat. We do need clarification on that because the new building doesn't have any fixed seats. So I don't know what that means. And then there's also, currently that a lot of on-street parking, and there's never been a complaint that we're aware of regarding parking or the traffic on a Sunday morning there.
Again, I'm not acting like I know there is a problem. I'm just saying that for those of us in Norwood who have churches in our area, we know what historically the problems are.
Yeah.
Even when you have a parking lot, people don't have a tendency to park in. So, that's all I had.
Okay.
All right. Any additional questions?
I'd like to hear from more of the crowd, fors and against, and then have discussion. And if we need to bring it back up, we'll do
Excellent.
questions in.
All right, thank you.
I thought he could answer a couple of them that Mike didn't know, that's why.
Would anybody else like to speak in favor of the change? Seeing none, I'll ask if anyone would like to speak in opposition to the change. Sir?
She's going to hand out some copies of the zoning code surrounding both zones.
Would you please state your name, sir?
Yeah, I will here in just a second. Thank you. Hi, I'm Cameron Kelly. I live at 4343 Floral Avenue, which is catty corner from New City Church and one house down. We bought our house 12 years ago and have put down deep roots here in Norwood. We've grown to love this place, and we consider Norwood our lifetime home. We do not plan to leave here. We became concerned several years ago when Norwood Presbyterian moved, and so we saw the building go vacant. But that quickly changed to excitement when New City purchased the church building. They really have breathed new life into the building and have been great neighbors, save for the time that someone unknowingly parked in front of our house or in our driveway in front of during a snowy day when they didn't know that there was a driveway there, and kept us from going to church. But they quickly resolved it, and that's been the only instance of any issue. So I was pleased to hear plans for that they are putting an addition, because we've attended Sunday services there several times, and the need for this addition is apparent. The attendance is robust. I'm all for this project happening. So I was surprised, however, when we received a notice of the request to change the zoning from the current R2 zoning to an office zoning, since the current code allows for a church facility in the R2 zone as a conditional use. The comment made about it being non-compliant is, in my opinion, not correct. It is a conditional use, but it is still allowable in the R2 zone. So upon further investigation, I learned that the office zoning allows for a broad variety of uses, from lodging to daycare and restaurants to trade schools. When comparing the two zones, the difference is enormous. R2, the current zone, 5 primary permitted uses, 4 conditional uses. Office zone, which is what the proposal is, 46 permitted uses. 46. And 4 conditional uses. I started to put some thought into what the future could look like with this zoning in the event that New City relocated. I know it was said that New City doesn't have any plans to leave, but I've been in the real estate world and even the church facilities world in my former job long enough to know that no one knows what the future is. Fires happen. Things happen within organizations, and there are unforeseen events, though the risk is low, that could cause that property to be vacated. So I imagined, if it was vacated, a hotel, multifamily housing, a complex of restaurants, what would the street parking look like? What would the impact be to the peace and quiet of the neighborhood, the charm? Would it be like Sunday mornings where the streets are full of parked cars for a block in every direction? This may sound extreme, but can you imagine sitting on your front porch right now and looking at the back of the Quality Inn? Yes, the risk is of this happening might be low, you say, but rezoning this property is a one-way street. It would never be zoned back to purely residential. I dug in deeper, making calls to the development director and New City staff to learn more about the reasoning behind this request. I discovered that New City approached the building department to let them know of their plans on the horizon and for help in determining what actions were needed as they move forward. Obviously, the first step in any building project is to meet zoning requirements, and as I understand it, there are several variances that would be required to move forward with the current zoning. I think those were nicely detailed out by Mr. Skelly. I was told by Mr. Skelly that the reason behind the proposed change to office was to deal with the nonconformances. But when I made a visit to the department office, he had developed this comparative assessment, which you have in front of you, that shows that there'll be a variance required for the office zoning as well. In the end, there are 2 options are, 1, a zoning change, the approval of that zoning change by the Planning Commission, the debate by council, 3 readings at council, approval by council, and then going to the BZA for an appeal after all. Or the second option, go to the BZA for an appeal. It seems like the BZA path is a little bit simpler and more straightforward. I fail to understand the need for this request and regard it as more of a want, as there is a clear path forward using the BZA to accomplish this project without need for a zoning change. The appeals process is faster, more efficient, and frankly, the way these types of issues are normally resolved, especially for projects of this scope. The character of this neighborhood is what makes the presidential district the presidential district. I can't tell you how many times I've told someone I lived in Norwood and they say, "There's the street over there, Floral Avenue. It's so beautiful." To let an office zone protrude a whole city block into this is a travesty, one that cannot be reversed. There are so many examples of mistakes that's in the past that still haunt this city today. I don't want to hear from people 30 years from now and say, "Why did they let that happen?" knowing that I could have spoken up but didn't. That's why I'm here today. But I want to reemphasize again, I 100% want to see New City expand to meet the needs of this community. There's already a viable path forward to do this with current zoning. Members of the Planning Commission, I urge you to table this proposal and advise New City to use the zoning appeals process. Let's not make irreversible decisions with the potential to negatively impact the neighborhood in the future. I have faith that this process will work. If not, there's always the option to come back to this commission and revisit this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Would anybody else like to speak in opposition to the change? Yes, ma'am. Please state your name.
Hi, I'm Renee Durker, and I live at 4110 Floral Avenue. I'm here to oppose the change in zoning from residential to office in the area of Floral and Washington Avenue. Although I appreciate all the work Mr. Kelly did, I'm here on a more slightly emotional and historical view of this whole thing. This particular church requesting the change has been whittling away at the housing stock in a desirable South Norwood neighborhood in what amounts to urban land stripping, strip mining. By taking down the houses on their block, they're negatively affecting the neighborhood as well as negatively affecting the city's coffers by depriving the area of housing stock as well as potential earnings tax revenue from the people that would have lived in those houses. Changing the zoning to office opens up the area to potential high-impact businesses in the future, as Mr. Kelly mentioned. Some of the block is already zoned office, and that should have stopped with Sharpsburg Primary School. But the fact that it hasn't means that the neighborhood desperately needs the reassurance of a zoning status of residential on the remainder of the block, including the north side of Washington Avenue. And that's in order to protect and buffer the neighborhood from further encroachment of non-residential entities. It's bad enough the neighborhood has suffered the loss of 3 houses that could have been renovated and the construction of a large obtrusive structure that doesn't fit the aesthetics of a residential area, but it would be a crime to further erode the neighborhood with a change in zoning. I appreciate the fact that New City has improved the building and they host community events and they want to be a vital part of the community. However, that should not be used. Their positive contribution should not be used to establish or attempt to establish a quid pro quo situation with Cincinnati or with city government entities. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Would anybody else like to speak in opposition to the zoning change? Sir?
My name's Greg Bowden. I've lived across the street from this church since 2003, and parking is definitely an issue. So to expand this church, there is no place to park. Every Saturday and Sunday, through the week, you fight for a place to park. You can't even get out of your driveway. They park 2 feet in your driveway. I've asked them numerous times, people said, no, I don't call the police all the time because I think that's absurd. I did one time because a girl parked literally in the middle of the driveway and you couldn't get out. But it's every weekend. And not that I own the street, but you are kind of entitled to the parking spot in front of your house. You should never have to fight for those day in and day out. The church is beautiful. It's a beautiful church. It's a landmark of this neighborhood. I'm born and raised here. I've played in that playground numerous days, but you have to address the parking issue at some point. And if you keep expanding, there's no place to park. There's no place to park now. You fight for spots, and you shouldn't have to do that. I can't make my driveway a double-wide driveway to park my car in there. So I should give them the right to keep expanding and have no place to park. Sometimes they block off the parking lot and have like parking lot parties, and there's really no place to park. And they're parked blocks and blocks and blocks. And now I look out my front door and I see a big parking lot because you tore a beautiful house down that could have been restored and been something good and brought more people into the city that actually do pay taxes, not a parking lot that's going to be extended to a wider driveway, not even parking spots. Like at some point we stop. If you build a bigger place, you're going to have more people. There's a bigger parking issue. And it's gotten out of hand. I mean, it's bad. It's really bad. Like, you can't even get out of your driveway in the mornings. So you shouldn't have to fight for a spot in front of your house. You shouldn't have to fight to get out of your driveway because people know how to park. And if you're going to expand, you should have a place to park. Work with the school. Use that parking lot. But don't even use the parking lot. It's always empty. They park on the streets. So.
Could you state your name and address again? The record didn't.
Greg Melton, 2319 Washington.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Anybody else who would like to speak in opposition? Yes, ma'am.
Do you need to swear in?
Yeah, she can.
Oh, yes.
She came in late. Can you raise your right hand, Jenny?
Oh, did I miss something?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
sure.
Thank you.
My name's Virginia Ressler. I live at 4302 Forest Avenue, the corner of Forest and Washington. Couple things to build on with what Renee had said. I'm passionate about the history. My house itself is the oldest one in that few block area. It was built in 1871. You've seen my house. There's never been any woodwork painted, so I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that. Especially the age of the community. Our Washington has granite curbs that were there when the street was laid out. It was laid out with granite curbs. Okay, they still exist. For the second time, I was mortified to be sitting in my backyard hearing something being torn down. And since I'm right off Smith, I'm thinking it's something going on in the street. Only the first time to see they were tearing down 2 houses. And then to my horror, last week, they're tearing down a third. 1890, okay? I take issue with their disingenuous reason for tearing the house down, that it just needed too much work. All of our houses need work. All of our houses, are expensive to upkeep. Again, disingenuous because they bought it to tear down without any input of us, okay? You might have had input from, I guess, the building department and stuff, but where was the real outreach to the people who you really affect? Just because that structure on Floral, we have down at Millcrest. You didn't need to tear those 2 houses down when we have a perfectly good facility that they could have used the same, only better, down at Millcrest. But no. Then they told me, well, there was asbestos. Well, again, all of our houses have asbestos.
Ma'am,
okay?
please address the board.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
So then now, when I messaged them through Facebook, you're doing it again, they come up with, well, it just needed too much work. Well, guess what? That house was just bought, within the last year, I think 9 months. Didn't they know it needed work then? I'll piggyback on what Renee says. Once we start allowing this, we haven't allowed a church to do this in over 20 years, to take down a house just for whatever. And just like we have beautiful churches in our community, but for how many years did many of them sit empty? We have no guarantee, just because they say they're going to be here, we have no guarantee. And then, like others have said, I'm sitting there, not only looking at an airplane hangar, but the rest of my block removed. My whole city view, sitting on my front porch or back by my pool, ruined. It's not neighborly. What they have done is not neighborly at all, by not including us into their plans so that we could have an input into the process of just disingenuous because they're tearing old houses down. And it doesn't, it's rolling right off their back. So that's it. Thanks. Stop the tear-downs.
Would anybody else like to speak in opposition? Seeing none? We will need to close the public hearing, and then we can move into discussion on the topic.
Can I address a couple of things, or is it past that time?
Yes, sir.
So I just wanted to address that we have documentation on the condition of those houses and what it would take for them to be usable for the church. If anybody ever wants to see it, that's fine. I mean, it's extreme costs. And the last one that was torn down had rotten floors in it that you could fall through. So there was no just disingenuous there. They were not in good shape. The other thing I want to say is that there is a verbal agreement that we are working on getting in writing with the school. They do share parking with the school. So the school is allowed to use SNC's parking in New City's property for teachers, and then on Sundays, the reverse. The churches are allowed to use the school's parking. So that is in effect. It's just not a documented agreement at this point. So, thanks.
Thank you.
He's got another,
That's why we shouldn't have did
am I
that.
allowed to rebut that?
Very briefly.
Again, the sad story that these houses were irredeemable. We all know that's not true. We see houses that are in deplorable condition, and then they're redone and selling for $300,000. The idea that that's coming from a Christian community, that's what they're telling us, that it's just too much. You bought the house knowing how much work it needed, okay? If you didn't want to do the work that was needed, you shouldn't have bought the property and let tax-paying families have a chance at it. Flippers like the Venturas have a chance at making it and restoring it to a beautiful home. That's what we're missing. They don't care. They give lip service to the community. If they cared about the community, this wouldn't have happened.
All right, thank you, ma'am. All right. Seeing no others to speak in opposition, move that we close the public hearing. Do I have a second?
that.
Ms. Town, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
Right. Now move that we open the regular Planning Commission meeting for April 6th, 2022. Ms. Town, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Schneider,
Present.
wait, roll call. Chairman Powers,
Present.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Present.
Mr. Hockney,
Present.
Mr. Sewer.
Present.
Okay, moving to discussion on item D2.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from the March 2nd meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Town, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay. I'd like to move now to new business. Discuss item 2, which which is the subject of the public hearing today. Do we have any discussion amongst the committee?
I'll start. May I start?
Please.
You know, I've been a proponent of New City Church and of the work that they're doing, and they've been involved in our community, and from the get-go, they've tried to be good, civic-minded neighbors. So I have no problems whatsoever with the church. I was not real happy when the two buildings were tore down on Floral Avenue, but I'd been in those. I'd been in those as a kid in the 70s, and they were in terrible shape then. And then the church took them over, and one of them was rehabbed, and it was put back in shape. But they were always not the greatest buildings in the first place. And you can say they had all this structural charm and all that, but quite frankly, they didn't have a ton of charm to it. They are not the homes that are on, that some of the residents live in here, and that's not the way they were built. They're in the presidential district, but every home in the presidential district is not this grandiose mansion, beautiful building. So, you know, that needs to be recognized. The building that was sitting right, I went to Boy Scouts all through the 70s and went to this church. The building right next door that they just tore down, or that was not in great shape years ago, and it had its challenges. So you can say any building can be rebuilt. I know they're tearing down buildings in Norwood and building new ones, new homes, new single-family residential homes right there. But it takes the right person. It takes the right time. It takes the right money. You have to purchase the property to do that. And, you know, quite frankly, in the city of Norwood, we do have some developers that'll come in here and do that. But then we have other developers that are willing to tear them down and rebuild. So there's a whole different dynamic when it comes to that stuff. I live on Floral Avenue. I recognize the parking issues. I drive right past there all the time. I drive past there when church is going on. I was driving past there when, for a period of time, they had a police officer out there directing traffic to let pedestrians get across Floral Avenue at Washington. I haven't seen that in a while. I guess that's because they are starting to use, or started to use, some of the parking in the back. My concern with this whole part is the encroachment of business upon our residential areas, and where does it stop? And the homes that are, so if the Planning Commission said, let's do this, I think that the other homes that are on Floral Avenue will be destroyed and taken down in no time. And I think the homes that are on Washington on that part of the block will be removed also. So then we've now moved business right into even closer to where it was, and we are removing a buffer. I'm not a big advocate of the change in zoning as it's presented here. I would be an advocate of them going to the BZA and asking for that approval, and there being discussion and it potentially going that way. I think the expansion of the church would be nice. I definitely would like to see that parking plan, and I think that's something that maybe the BZA should say, you know, is contingent upon the approval, is there is some sort of parking plan set up, because it does make a challenge for people who live in the neighborhood. So, you know, those are my 2 cents on the whole, and I'll let the discussion go from there. But, you know, I think we're going to run into this in other areas of the city. And I think we've ran into it in other areas of the city at times. And sometimes the cities did well by the residents and by the people who wanted to make the changes, and other times we've fumbled the ball. And this is one where I think we have a chance to do it right. It depends on what this board thinks. So.
Additional discussion?
I agree with Mayor Schneider on most of what he said. I think it's important that we do get feedback from the residents who live there. I think that if we change the zoning, we're opening Pandora's box, as you just mentioned. And I think if we're going to do something, it needs to be done well. And I do think that the residents deserve to have feedback as far as the buffer zones, as you mentioned, landscaping. They deserve that because they live there.
Can I do a rebuttal on that? They do have council members that they speak to, and there are ways for residents that live in there's public notice that goes out on these. So it's not like there's no way for community members to provide feedback and be involved in this from the get-go. So, and the city has a pretty open book when it comes to the planning commission, when it comes to BZA, when it comes to any development that goes on in our community. There's a lot of information that goes out there, whether they actually ask for it, whether they really want to know that information or not. But we have council members that talk, I guarantee you, they'll talk to any community member about different developments that are going on, and they'll say and do what needs to be done to make sure that the residents and the community members are heard. If there are community members that expect somebody to come and tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, what do you think of this? You're probably not going to get that, because we've got 20,000 residents. Every time there's a development, don't expect the city to come out and knock on your door and say, what do you think? Don't expect the developer to come out and do that. It's going to take effort on their part to talk to their council members, who are their representatives, and absolutely needs to happen. So I don't mean to,
You're correct,
but,
yeah.
but that's a fact.
You both said it very well. I do not like the idea of the encroachment that this would create. And I live in a presidential district as well. And you're seeing expansion coming towards it repetitively. It seems like any more people trying to get in that area, turn it into different businesses. I like the neighborhood how it is. I know we all have changes we go through, but I don't think this would be the right one for that neighborhood.
My only comment, so I don't repeat, is I was confused when I read this as an agenda item, as a public hearing. That's the reason I asked did the public hear about it, because I think BZA is absolutely the place this has to go, because all my questions, Vic, and that's why I was asking, I feel like I only got half the information. That's on one point. The second point is, why an office district? And I'm just going to be very candid. If the direction came from our city employees, then I'm kind of wondering where's their reason that the applicant should go in that direction? Because I don't get it. I don't see it. I don't see it as a benefit for this project, maybe long term. So I'm very candidly, I would not like this to be an office change. I think R2 is the right. We have a mechanism to get this project built. Why wouldn't you leave it? And it protects the neighbors.
Yeah.
So
Would you like me to respond to that, or?
Please?
Would you like me to respond to that, or?
I guess maybe it was there a different discussion with where the department did. Yeah, it's very candidly, I would be appreciative.
So the short about it, I don't think there was really any nefarious or, underlying issue. It was essentially probably myself and probably definitely Mark Reeves saying, being called out by an applicant landowner. And we would, again, I don't think we would respond any differently whether it was PLK, a residential person asking for an addition onto their house, saying if they had a large enough land and they were talking about a major development, how else could they do this? So the no-brainer was, okay, you could ask for a rezoning. And, clearly the applicant made application, it's not that expensive, and it's almost like a trial balloon as to see if they would do that. Okay. So definitely the options are going through the BZA, and they could be a single or multiple, hearings for that, and then go through the public notification for everyone, and then decide on a case-by-case merits for the different relief that they're asking for.
Okay, well that explains.
Yeah, so
you basically gave them one pathway, probably the easier pathway to just have a project done, where the other way, BZA, they have to come with things like showing buffers, showing setbacks.
Can I throw out there from an administrator, an administrative, I think this is great discussion. I think that the fact that the staff, the building department staff is presenting options to what can be done and giving them paths to I think that's nothing but good. The notifications go out to all the community members around it. I think that's such an important part of what our community government does. Our municipality should run that way. Having this discussion in front of and on with speaker is necessary. So, and I do think that as part of my job as the mayor, it's looking at developments and looking at what people are bringing, and I want that team saying, here's some ways to crack that egg. How can we make this happen? We've got an awful lot of property around here that needs to be developed, that needs improved upon. And I think that the building department and making suggestions and providing some guidance is critically important. So, Mike, I think that you and Mark are doing what needs to be done. It's this public venue that it gets discussed. It's sitting in, council members will say, we normally try to have 3 readings of an ordinance because that's the structure that we work in, and that's how it should work. And BZA, same thing. And somebody asked me the other day, can I come to a BZA meeting or are they closed? It's like, no, they're not closed. You can absolutely come to a BZA meeting. You can absolutely come to a planning commission meeting. So this is all good, and it's good discussion that's necessary. So thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I'll concur with the sentiment that you all expressed, that this is not a good long-term change to make this from an R2 to an office. For all the reasons that have already been mentioned, I won't belabor the point, but based on the discussion that we've had here, unless we feel like we have further discussion that needs to be had, I'd be happy to entertain a motion to resolve this. Would anybody?
Well, I'll try to make a motion that everybody, I'll make the motion that motion that we do not approve a zoning change of this parcel as identified from R2 to office.
I'll second that.
Second. Ms. Town, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Chairman Murphy, Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
Motion passing. The recommendation will be denied for change from R2 to office. Okay. In the interest of keeping our being mindful of our audience's time, I'd like to move now to open discussion item E1. Dana Bowl, on behalf of Keep Norwood Cool.
Hi, everybody. Sorry. I've got a presentation. Is it loading? So that was an interesting discussion. I was really struggling to not enter into the fray. One reason that Keep Norwood Cool started our current study is that we saw so much asphalt around the schools and the playgrounds, and so that's been a focus of our study. And so my ears really perked up when I heard that you were collaborating with the schools. And I just wanted to mention that I think public engagement is very important and can yield you a great result. We had some public engagement around the community garden. Everybody got really invested at that. And the other thing is that one of the biggest trends now in funding is green schoolyards and funding them. They're basically very popular with funders. So as long as you're coordinating with more people, you might have more friends. So.
Which file did you want?
You told me the PDF is the one that's going to work. Either one, the one that works. So I gave you guys some handouts to follow along.
First 2 switches.
Oh, gee.
Whichever switch gets these lights.
Will that work?
I won't get it.
Okay, great.
That's good. That's it.
All right, I hope I know what I'm doing here. Oh, I just clicked it out. Okay, you're going to do it. Okay, I currently work with people that really love PowerPoint, and I always hated PowerPoint, but now they've sort of brought me in. So our discussion today is about permeable possibilities, and I have a little joke here, trigger warning, potholes and flooding, might be mentioned. I know that when we mention potholes, that really brings out a lot of complainers. So our current situation, let's go to the next slide.
Where are you
I
going?
think you scroll on this.
Well, no, you can.
There you go, scroll, just
You
scroll.
really want to go to the presentation.
There is a PowerPoint file in there.
Yeah, the PowerPoint's up. Well,
Wait a minute.
this is not PowerPoint that you want.
It's a how-to.
We're going to just have to scroll. Like that.
You can do fit in window, I think. It's all right. Okay, so what we're looking at here are two maps of Norwood. The one on the right is a larger map. It shows pervious surfaces and our canopy being any tree that's over 20 feet tall. So you can see all that taupe or gray area, those are all opportunity zones for permeable pavers or pervious pavers, also now known as structured paving. So the map on the left is actually from Groundwork ORV. They are currently working a lot in Price Hill, but they are also collaborating a lot with the EPA and also NASA. And this map comes from their grant from working with NASA. And you can plainly see that in terms of the county, we have a lot of pervious surfaces. And that doesn't happen overnight, and that's not always our fault. Some of, we've got the federal highway system, we've got this ODOT, we were near rail, and we had a lot of manufacturing, so we have a variety of things going on that contributed to this. But again, tapping on what I just said about green schoolyards, one thing that everybody is funding is equity-based restoration of communities that have sort of inequitably suffered from overdevelopment. So there's a lot of money for this kind of thing out there. So in the next slide, thank you, Carrie. In the next slide, I just have a couple water facts for you. And I'm no hydrologist and I'm no civil engineer. Water is one of asphalt's natural enemies. Puddles of water on an asphalt pavement will slowly break it down, causing a pothole to form. So they're natural enemies. Water flows at 5 feet per second in a pipe. Of course, that's unobstructed. That's 3.4 miles per hour, or a walking pace. So when water's hitting concrete, that's how fast it's going to the drain. The standard 5/8-inch garden hose delivers 17 gallons per minute. That's under pressure, but still, when you think about it, that's a lot of water if it's moving unobstructed. So finally, a 30 by 30 foot patch of concrete can shed over 550 gallons of water from 1 inch of rain. So I know that I have a 2-car parking pad and a long driveway. I figure I have 3 of those. So I'm shedding a lot of water into off into the groundwater or the storm sewer or down my driveway. So I have some other facts there for you, but I've committed to doing this in 10 minutes. So the next slide. So by contrast, permeable pavement installed and maintained correctly can percolate between, and the 2 words are percolate and infiltration for how water moves through these systems, can percolate between 5.6 to 18.5 gallons of water per minute per square foot. So this makes permeable pavement a huge opportunity for Norwood. I did do a little a little measuring and calculating here for the parking lots that are to the east of the school, and the total square feet in that parcel. And by the way, I just want to say that doing this type of infrastructure is currently not legal. So it's totally it's totally logical that that's asphalt, and I just want to say that. So if we have 92,000 square feet, that means if conservatively we had a permeable system and it was accepting 6 gallons per square foot per minute, it would be taking out of our system 553,000 gallons per minute. And on the, if we're talking about 10 gallons, it's almost 1 million gallons per square foot per minute. That's kind of like, wow. Sorry. So it's currently shedding, and I know I've got 1 inch of rainfall, and I could only get so many facts and figures together here, but it's currently shedding in 1 inch of rainfall, 563,000 gallons in 1 inch of rainfall, which, depending on if it's moderate, slow, moderate, high, they were saying a moderate rainfall can be like 2 hours. It can be an hour and a half, it could be 3 hours. So, at any rate, speaking to, the parking in the schools and everything with the churches, because we have the situation with churches too. Our next slide is about heat island effect. So the other statements I found over and over again is permeable pavement, particularly interlocking pavers, fight heat island effect resulting in cooler temperatures. They also cause trees to thrive in settings with structured pavers, which allow water to infiltrate to the roots with less compaction of soil. So what happens with asphalt is it really compacts the roots, and that happens with concrete also. These are the graphics I use for the Girl Scout presentation, so hopefully everybody, they seem to work well with everybody. So what happens is we have asphalt warms much more aggressively and retains its heat. Concrete's kind of in the middle, and you can see what the air temperature is. And this is really the crux of what the participatory mapping study is all about. It's about discovering areas that are warmer than they should be because of all this heat radiation that's going on. And so the graphic in the lower right is, if you could scroll up a little so people could see that. There you go. So sometimes we have situations where the heat is bearing down and warming the surface, but then we also have a building and orientation, east-west, time of day, all of these things factor into the situation. But, we have a lot of that with our schools. So the little graphic to the left, unfortunately, our early crowdsourcing of our maps, they're screenshots. So this isn't really a great resolution, but you can see where that map wraps around the school campus, and it's definitely warmer. It goes up into the red zone. And same with Norwood Avenue. That's an east-west route. And then when you come back into Floral Avenue, it cools off again. So our study, this presentation isn't really linked to our study, but it's definitely where we're going. We want our study to kind of inform this kind of thing. So, okay, so next slide. I'll just say there are some limitations and considerations. This is a lot of new technology. And what I did is just grabbed a couple of case studies and things that I thought you guys would be interested in, some opportunities. And I only used 2 materials. There are a lot of materials out there. There's True Grid, which is a plastic grid. I brought some of it. You fill it with different sizes of aggregate. And there's usually like an 18-inch or 2-inch, 2-foot base That's okay. I thought that they would just want to see it. It's not really for people. So, and then there's something called bell guard, and those are pavers that sit on gravel, and they interlock also, but they're not plastic. They're a kind of a stone type of thing. So anyway, considerations. Most of the zoning around this will require a wheel load of 4,000 pounds. Many of them are not ADA compliant, so if you have a handicap parking space, that can't be the permeable, although there are new things coming online all the time, and I've got one in here. You can't use it where it's restricted when you're using any kind of hazardous material that could spill and go into the groundwater. Installation is all of these companies, they have lunch and learns, they have very specific criteria for installation, and that the warranty is tied to that. So I could foresee Mark Reeves really getting into whatever the manufacturer is saying you have to do. Those are the requirements. So it's kind of like a built-in pathway for your quality concerns. A lot of the zoning, they only allow for the structured systems that have this kind of written out, tested plan for installation. Now, I know it's probably not exactly what the Stantons want to hear, but if in my mind, if they could prove that, well, we've got 2 feet of aggregate and we've got the crushed stone on top and it retains this water and it's performing, then that would be like a variance and they could obtain that. But going forward, you would probably want to narrow things down to something that could be, managed. So then the turf systems, which I think are super cool, this you can use gravel and stone, or you can top it off with some soil and grow grass in it. So the turf systems that do that are only typically for light or overflow use, or like fire lanes. I mean, fire lanes, how many fire lanes do we have in Norwood? We never have a fire, they never get used, and there they are paved and have to be maintained and everything else. So, okay, now we'll go into the 2 images at the bottom that you see are both fire lanes. The one on the left is a retirement village. They have to maintain a fire lane around the whole back area. And of course, people look out on this area. So what they did is they turned it into a they said, okay, it's going to be a naturescape and people can go back there and walk. And so it's green. And then what they've done in the center of that is put something that's ADA compliant so people can go out there in their wheelchairs and stuff. The LinkedIn headquarters was an early adopter. Their whole outside area is done with this, and they have, places to have lunch, and it's very much like a park. So our next slide. Thank you, Carrie. Now, okay, this one's for Jean. The first one is an area that had a community garden, and they wanted to add a market. So they used the bell guard pavers. Everything drains. It's real easy. That's real easy to walk on. This one's ADA compliant. And that way, when they're doing stuff with their garden and water, it just drains. So, and the one to the right is an environmentally sensitive area outside of Chattanooga where there's a lot of kayaking and rock climbing and stuff. And they had a hostel out there, and then they wanted to add a restaurant. Well, they couldn't because they didn't have the stormwater infrastructure. So by adding the permeable pavers, they were able to add the restaurant without violating some of the environmental concerns. The one at the bottom is kind of near and dear to my heart because it's in Brooklyn. It's not far from the school I went to. And Vic, I got these pictures for you because they're construction pictures. That's how it works. This stuff links together, and then they come in and they used a real fine sand because this is not far from the basketball arena. So what they're doing, used to be downtown Brooklyn was dead. Like nobody worked there, nobody wanted to be there. And now it's been revitalized. So during the day, they've got people that want to go outside for lunch. And in the evening, they have a need for all this parking. So it's two things. It's a park during the day, and it's parking at night. Okay, we're bringing this thing in for a landing, don't worry. So event parking. This next page, it's a ranch. It was like a ranch, and then it became a wedding venue. So they had all this space. Well, they didn't want to ruin the character of it, so they used the turf. Of course, there are only parking people there on the weekends. Then there's a cutaway of the two different systems. How it works essentially is you have the 2 feet or 18 inches of large aggregate. The larger aggregate makes bigger spaces. The water goes in there, it acts as a trough, and then it slowly distributes it out. So then I said these typically are not ADA compliant, and then I had recalled when I went and got into this for the charrette that there were a lot of bike trails because people would want a bike trail and then they couldn't fund it, but with this stuff they could get it done. So here's an ADA compliant nature trail, and what I liked about this was it was all volunteer installed. It looks like Public Works came through and did the grading and the graying, and then they have all different kinds of people helping them lay it out, and then wheelbarrow the crushed stone. I mean, I can think of lots of projects for that. So, okay, ordinances and notes. Don't worry, I'm not going to read this out loud to you, but I will say there's. I don't know the manufacturer of this, but the Civic Garden Center, their parking lot has this, and it really seems to be holding up really well. Over in Marymount, they've got it in their easement. They've got trees, they've got green space, and it's kind of broken up. So I know, Mike, you made a remark about these rain gardens looking terrible. You know, maybe you don't want to have like plants all through the easement, but you can break them up with the permeable pavers, and that way the water's getting into, you know, your little greenscaping. So I thought this was interesting goal, Tybee Island. Their goal is for the first 1 inch of rainwater to remain on site and not enter the storm sewer. So, you know, that's an island. I'm sure they have limited capacity. So, you know, I was thinking, well, how could we, you know, how many driveways would it take for us to kind of start seeing a change? And, you know, that's for your engineer, not me. You don't want me to do that. So, let's see. There were a couple other, I highlighted the things that might be of interest in blue just because I think they're like low-hanging fruit. And that's it. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I just want to say I'm totally for it from the water side and also from the managing heat island side. You know, I could see where this situation with the church, you know, my concern is that it's just going to be just a ton of asphalt, and while, you know, we are moving parents through and drop off and all that, we're not going to have it broken up with any trees, or they're going to be trees that get put in there and they're half dead, and, you know, so I think there are a lot of possibilities. So I hope that this becomes something that there's a pathway for citizens and commercial citizens to do this. I have a lot of you don't know who I am. The last page kind of gives you a little download on, you know, I try to be an advocate, so, and give the city resources so they can do things. So that's, I don't know. Does that sound good to you?
Thank you, Ms. Bowl.
Okay.
Any questions for Ms. Bowl while we have her attention? All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate your time here today. Okay. Moving back up on our agenda to old business. Item C1, ongoing zoning ordinance amendment and review. I believe we received some feedback from Mark Reeves, Building Inspector, and Dan Bly, Chief Building Official. And this is related to the draft ordinance that's been provided. Okay. I think probably the easiest way for us to address these, they're all kind of all under item C1, broken down to a couple of smaller pieces. Does anybody have any general feedback first from themselves regarding the ordinance draft that they'd like to share or discuss?
I just, for clarification, looking at this, I mean, there's quite a few of the changes that we discussed are already in here. The yellow portions of it are really the points to discuss. This is not a total rewrite of the ordinance, it's really just corrections and clarifications. So, looking at the first one, getting the building commissioner to chief building official, we had discussion on that. Do we want to just work down through this and well, ultimately, we could just nod our head. Yeah, that seems like that's what we discussed last time, and we're working in the right direction.
I think that would be just fine. So beginning with section 4A, that's on page 2 of the draft ordinance. Chapter 1115.01 and 1115.02 shall be amended by replacing the term building commissioner with chief building official or authorized staff delegate. Everybody accepting of that as it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Section 4B, Chapter 1117.16, Appeal of Decision of Chief Building Official, 1119.03, Approval of Zoning Permit, 1119.10, Complaints regarding violations shall be amended by adding the text, or authorized staff delegate in conjunction with Chief Building Official. I believe that is as discussed.
Yes.
Looking down at section 6 regarding architectural projections. Mike, would you explain the red highlight?
Sure. So for page 2, section 6, there is suggested wording amendments that are indicated in bold, italics, and underline. And then I have it in red kind of in terms of where, I guess, more of the debate comes in. So originally, as you see here, this is what I was drafted and what I was suggesting, and that was based on kind of limited discussion I had with Ben Eilerman with regards to concerns that he had and similar issues from the BZA. You also have in your package Dan Bly's response, and if you would go down to the corresponding section, 1151.13, Dan provides, I guess, his further revision of this, and I've looked at it, hadn't had any further discussion, I haven't heard anything back beyond in terms of what things, but what I saw he had is perfectly fine. It's getting towards where we would allow some flexibility with regards to architectural projections, additions. So whether you would accept mine, whether you accept Dan's, again, because I'm fine on both, but obviously you're getting feedback from the chief building official who's rightly responsible for the interpretation, and he's providing his further tweak on that provision. So, if you'd like to proceed, again, I'm happy recommending what I see is perfectly fine.
This was an important, I'm sorry, Mike.
Sure.
This was an important discussion we had. And reading, I hear what you said. I mean, I clearly hear you talking about, Dan's interpretation. Dan ultimately is the one who's going to be looking at this. Do you have, Bernie, did you have any, looking at what Mike wrote, seems like that was more of what our discussion was.
I think they're very similar. I mean, is my answer as I compared the two.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of variance between them. The issue is that, well, anyway, I think they're very close. I think that I could go with either one. I mean, Dan Bly's is very easy to understand. Mike's is easy to understand. Now, Mike added the one thing about the height restriction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on a single-story addition, correct, Mike? That was
Correct, and I think that's why you see in Dan's revision, he was definitive and put it at 15 feet as being likely representative of what would deemed an appropriate one-story.
And I think you were giving a little more leeway, saying, well, if the building's the existing building's a little higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'd wanted almost a match instead of, so.
I think I would be more in favor of sticking with the language that it not exceed the height of the existing structure. If we have a single-story structure that's 16 feet tall, somebody's going to look at that and say, well, I don't care to match it, I'll just make it a foot shorter and skip the BZA process. Where I think in the interest of having better buildings and better construction, we'd want to go ahead and allow them to match that existing structure. I think having the single-story restriction on it is just fine for me.
I agree.
So would we like to stick with this language as is? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, I think we're talking about.
Okay, let's just be clear, because it's like,
I think we're saying.
I go by the
we like
Queen's approach,
Mike's
unless I'm
comments
spoken
here.
to, I'll keep my mouth shut.
Very
But yeah,
close to the chief building inspector.
Correct.
But Mike, you've
Yeah.
listened to all of the dialogue that we've had on this.
yeah, and
And
again,
that's one of the benefits that you had.
yeah, so for those that don't, and hopefully I'm not saying anything, so the safety services director background is one of law. So in terms of, you're absolutely right. Someone could say, well, fine, I have it at 16. You know what? I heard the BZA can be a bear, and I don't want to get my neighbors involved, blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to have a pumpkin sort of carve out and just leave it at that, and then it's going to look funky, but, no harm, no foul, I'll get my permit. So obviously, by keeping it not exceeding the existing house, or whatever it's going to be, it's consistent. So, but I think at least in defense of Dan, that's what probably his logic was. So,
So we're using Mike's
Yes, that's what I
written
would
word.
recommend.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, sounds good.
Okay. Moving on to page 4, section 12. Mike, will you touch on this section for us real quick?
yes, sir.
Just a brief highlight.
I am lost.
Page 4, section 12, it's in an indented paragraph.
Removal of under no circumstance shall the board.
So we said page 4 of this document.
Yes.
Correct.
It's section 12, begins chapter 1117.21.
Thank you. So, let me get a bit into the background of this section. So, what I was attempting to do is essentially go through that entire section where we have provisions for conditional uses and conditions for variances. And when I looked at what's written in the ordinance right now, my position or thought process was to consolidate where possible. So what I was planning on doing, at least in this ordinance, is to essentially, if we're following the same Board of Zoning Appeals process, that it is circulated to the public, we have a hearing, and on those items that are pretty much identical, well, why not just modify one and then delete the other? Because they're almost saying the same thing. Now, the findings of fact or the criteria used for variances and conditional use are completely separate. Those would remain. But the position is that you would essentially not replicate additional text that might be superfluous to go through this thing. So that was the thought process. Now, in terms of going through that, one of the big things, and this is where it does get a little bit controversial, so you see under section 12, there's an underline. And what I was gearing this to, I was hoping, it was kind of prompted by now getting into this section, almost as the later date, and the big debate or consideration is, and this is what's triggering in other parts of the zoning ordinance, would the city be open to considering allowing for use variances? So right now, that's expressly prohibited. In Dan's comment, and you kind of see it, where he's referencing section 1117.27, and again, he doesn't mince words. It's like under no circumstances. So he has a very particular position that, and as it's written in the ordinance, the city, through the BZA, should not consider use variances. And I can go on and explain why. And Bernie, I'm sure you can elaborate, but essentially what I'm thinking, and this is something where I'll dig in my heels a bit, I think, and whether as a planner or in terms of promoting economic development, it's nice to have that safety valve where the city on a case-by-case basis could say, well, fine, we have a use is that it's similar, but it's not identified in the zoning ordinance, and it's worth having at least the BZA on a monthly basis consider such thing under valid reasons or appropriate arguments being made, and then have a hearing and let it be decided, as opposed to, you saw earlier discussions about having a wholesale rezoning. So in the sense, sometimes there might be, and I'll use an example where I came from, not here because you guys saw the benefit of including that, but for microbreweries, that was a use in the zoning ordinance where I came from where it wasn't expressly allowed. So the position that was left for me, I had to take each of those, and for the 3.5 years that I was there, I entertained 4, and each time I had to bring it before our equivalent of the BZA. And eventually they said, this is crazy, just write it into the thing. I said, well, I could, but I'm at odds in terms of ensuring that the council will approve it. So I don't know, and this is still part of my sort of long-winded pitch, as to how many requests typically the BZA gets for use variances. Is it something that's controversial, or is it just something that they really want to leave up to council? But it's something where I'd at least like, whether it's this body or council, to explore the pros and cons of having that option. So, like I said, there will be reasons brought up earlier because I wanted to leave that to the end, just to have to manage the process as we go through these, like we talked about low-lying fruit. Mm-hmm. Use variance is something a little bit more thorny, and I think it's worth having more discussions. And we saw it today, and I'm happy we had those type of discussions about what's good for the community. But it's nothing that I don't think the city would be doing towards. I think there's other municipalities in Ohio that do it. I did some research on it. I'm happy to share that if you are willing to entertain it. But whether it's a planner or at least for economic development, I believe allowing that tool as part of our toolkit would be a nice option to have.
Well, I'll answer you had a question in there, and I'll answer that question. We don't see it very often. And one of the reasons is, the only reason we come to BZA is when it's gray. And then we have discussions on those issues. So that answers kind of the question. It's not, it's, at least from my remembering over the years, I can't remember this being significant, month after month or every other month or anything like that. So that was your question, right?
Correct, yeah.
How often do I see it?
Yeah.
Gary, for the last how many years you've sat through, do you see many applicants for a use variance?
The conditional use, but we don't, not a use variance. It's either a conditional use or they're challenging the chief building code official's interpretation of their definition of their business.
So, anyways, at least to wrap it up, not to stymie the discussion. So you can still proceed and keep it in, and we could leave that discussion for a later date. All I'm saying, the main part, when you see from sections 12 onward, was essentially looking at redundant text. But when I came across that section, because that use variance provisions is there, I had to make a decision one way or the other. So I said, fine, maybe now I have to kind of broach the subject.
I would leave it in there.
Mike, the current process is that would go before council, is that right?
For
a conditional use?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's fine with me.
What would go before council, I'm sorry?
Go to BZA first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any, you guys have any discussion or any, want to?
Again, I would support leaving it in as stated. It's not been a problem to date. And I guess maybe use variance to me is, the issue about with our corner lots with stores. But in 2013, there was a change because of all the issues. We had all these abandoned buildings in Norwood, and new uses were listed. Now, again, I think that was Norwood being responsive to a real blight that we had in our city.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's the only one that I can think of that, I'm glad it's in there because it does allow a use variance.
I agree. I think this is a way to make the city more responsive, more nimble, and to still allow a method for that public input and that public hearing on these options. So I agree. I support keeping it in here. Okay.
What's the next one?
Moving on, section 21. This is actually on page 6, 5 and 6. Mike, would you discuss this one briefly for us?
Sure. Just go to the original. So, with regards, again, Bernie just brought up that identical, this history. So it started off as having maybe repetitive uses. The city responded to the issue and made a wholesale change to the zoning. So returning to that corner commercial lot provision that we have, what I was thinking, and again, you kind of follow my logic a bit and see with regards to the highlight, where, and I'll boil it down to this, is the value of this provision concentrated or focused on maybe the abandoned building that's there, or is it in the land? And, I did talk to the law department specifically, Tim Gary about this. Obviously, you can see Dan Bly's provision. The belief or the position of the city right now is that the argument is that you have a abandoned or a blighted building, and you are giving it the incentive to do something different and make it a viable use. I was just probably taking it even further at least saying, well, fine, is it the property? And to me, the property starts with the land. So if there is an issue where it could have been a corner store lot that has been since demolished, does that provision that we have right now, or could it be extended to that property? And at least what you're seeing from Dan's response is no, because the value or the city's thought process is no, the value is in the building, and that's what we're trying to protect. If someone, a developer, whoever demolishes the building, you just lost that right. So that's essentially the idea behind, at least between the suggested changes for section 21. So.
And Mr. Bly's recommendation is leave it as is.
Correct. Again, it's, and I don't disagree with him. He's, it's absolutely right. I'm just being maybe more generous or more development oriented, or at least a lot more lenient about it. But it's absolutely right. I think the value and what you probably had coming for prior to 2013 was, hey, I have this building. It's not configured for residential, I can't get any tenants, can you give me some relief so I don't have to build a BZA or whatever, and they rolled it into the zoning ordinance. So again, I think I've stated publicly, either before this body or the council, that you should applaud yourself for doing that, because after 3.5 years of banging my head against the wall where I was before, I couldn't even get such simple things included in zoning ordinance. So
We're very progressive.
Yeah. Mike, doesn't this, in some ways, I mean, for those of us who have lived in Norwood a long time, we like these buildings.
yeah.
So you making the change would give an opportunity for folks to demo the building, lose the history, and start over.
Potentially.
Right.
Yeah.
Where right now it does not.
Potentially, yeah.
And that's what I think Dan Bly is stating. So I think we have to make that decision, because I think in most cases, they'll tear the building down. It costs $14,000 to tear it down, and not have to put up with exactly what the, not being proper. But I like your message here. Is it the land or is it the
being more
building?
sympathetic to the developer, saying, well, fine, I'm tearing the building down because I only need 1,000 square feet. I'm going to pick it up with regards to additional parking, which my customers are more needing. So it's more pushing it towards a suburban use, which developer is going to be looking for.
Mike, do you see one of these choices as having an impact on blight for these properties?
What we just talked about?
Yeah, I mean, is one of
No,
these choices more likely to result in blight than the other?
I don't think so. I think, we've had discussions with Norwood together about, what can we do better? And I'm talking collectively for the city. So one of the arguments, and I was doing a quick survey on behalf of Norwood together, calling surrounding real estate agents, saying, hey, are you aware of this provision? Do you kind of use it as an inducement? And a lot of the feedback was, never even heard of it. So maybe that's part of our fault. Hey, maybe we should promote it more, because, like I said, it's a tool in our toolbox. Maybe we should kind of do that, just a little bit of more promotion for people that have it. We had recently the one for the Venturas on, I forget the address.
Williams?
I think it's the Forest.
Forest.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so there's something where, again, they're knowledgeable, they deal with the building department, and they're aware of opportunities. But, maybe we just need to do a better job advertising that provision or marketing it. So.
Looks like I'll leave it alone. No change, at least to me.
So is Mayor's your position that we would follow Mr. Bly's recommendation here?
My recommendation, yes, is that we would follow Mr. Bly's. That's correct.
Okay.
I was thinking Dan's. No, Dan's. Dan Bly, yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I do agree with the mayor on that one. So I believe Mike, we would remove section 21 if that is
Okay.
what the rest of us concur with.
I agree.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll remove section 21 of the ordinance. Okay.
You're removing it, or
Section-
you're not amending it?
I guess removing from the draft zoning ordinance.
Yeah, so you're not
We're
removing.
not gonna-
Yeah, yes. Removing from the draft zoning
For
ordinance.
clarification, Tom.
Section 21.
I was on that
Okay,
line.
all right.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
Last part?
Now on page 8, on Exhibit A. Mike, would you touch on this briefly for us?
So essentially, I think, and this is, again, I just say, I agree with Dan, it's really not necessary, so the provision for that, section, 115, make sure I give it the exact.
But it's just a clarification, the way you have it spelled out. It's more just clarifying as somebody was reading this.
Yeah. Yeah, so essentially, for item 22, with regards to that transition district, hopefully there's no debate, but at least with regards to part of the table, providing for that 11-15-02, I agree with Dan, it's duplicative, so we don't really need it, so at this point.
But it does pertain to the interpretation of this table. Is that accurate?
Correct, I think, Dan is just saying it might be overkill, like why restate it when it's
Yeah.
already known other places in the ordinance.
I think for a person who's not out there utilizing this type of ordinance very often, I think this is a good thing to keep there. Let's not make them search through
I
it.
Totally agree.
There is no consistency in these type of, Mike, you know that, so I like keeping it in just for that reason.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
concur.
I think, again, maybe in my defense of having it, the reason why, if the intent is that after we massage this table, and we have it posted online, it just provides that additional caveat saying, hey, if you're unsure, blah, 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 you need to talk with the department, or at least have that clarity provided, because if you give nothing and say, just refer to the zoning ordinance, and I do not know how many pages we have right now for the zoning ordinance, but assuming we have like 150, they're not going to necessarily go through the legal definitions and go through all the other things.
I agree. People are going to pull this table up and say, here's where all my answers are.
And every municipality is different, and these developers, and people, and community members, everyone's different. So it's good to have a clarification clause like that. It might be redundant, it doesn't need to be everywhere, but on this is going to be, it's a working form, so yeah. Keep it in.
All right. Mike, we have a couple of items in the chart that are highlighted. Would you touch on those for us? First one I see is on page 10.
Okay. Are you talking about the red or the yellow?
Yes.
Okay, both.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Correctly put.
And I would say, for the benefit of everyone, don't worry about it. This was my own, I guess, logic or organization. So in our ordinance, we have provisions, I believe it again says here, if you kind of read it, 112105, where things are expressly prohibited. So that's something down the road, if, and we decide to do it or not. When I came here, it was interesting to see how the city classifies and provides a legal description. So whether it's a Class C retail or certain uses, obviously it was written in the ordinance out and out prohibiting these uses. So I just wanted to make sure, and occasionally Carrie can attest to, I pick up the phone and I answer zoning questions, and it's just I want to make sure that one day I'm not saying, oh yeah, car wash, go ahead and do it, fine, no problem.
Understood.
That makes sense.
I don't want you saying that if it's a problem. That's
Yeah.
great.
Okay. I believe that concludes our discussion on C1A. Moving on to C1B. Says discussion of suggested list of changes from Mark Reeves, Building Inspector.
So that, I believe you definitely have in your package. There's a title to that effect, Proposed M. Reeves Suggestions. Now, what I'd like to do, so Mark was pretty generous with his time. He went through the entire ordinance, gave me a red markup, and I've kind of marked these in this essentially one pager that you see in front of you.
What page is this, please?
That is
one of one. It's a separate, right after the table that we were last
You
reviewing.
got to look at the
Got it.
top.
All right.
Yeah, so after, I guess, page 12 of 12, there should be hopefully like a page 101. So what Mark did was first go through the entire ordinance and mark it up, and then I sat down with him and kind of reread it, and we went back and forth. And then what I did was try to boil it down to kind of a very simple chart form where we could, for this purpose of meeting, going through it and best articulate his concern or argument. And hopefully it's pretty clear. His first, I guess, wholesale argument that his belief that the RMX zone is no longer necessary. So we could just get rid of that altogether. His understanding, and again, I put in the proposed side, that it was kind of created at a time when we had concerns for people doing a lot of these rehabs and creating an additional accessory unit. And what occurred later in 2013 is that you actually wrote into the zoning ordinance a prohibition against that. So the argument of having the zone clarifying almost the same thing was really not necessary anymore. Now, we don't have a zoning map in this room.
Yes,
but,
you do.
Sorry?
No, you don't, you're right.
Okay. But I'd like to show you, it's fairly substantial. I can't tell you how many acres it is, but it's a decent chunk of the city. So his argument was like, get rid of it. It's really not necessary.
And what would it become?
R2, at least that was marked.
It's the south side of Williams and right around the Norwood Plaza area. And then the south side of Williams is RMX.
So that's something where, again, I would maybe take a look at it, think further. But when I looked into it, read the stuff, looked at the maps, I didn't balk at his idea. I think it made perfect sense. So without spending a lot of time and money and effort, to me, again, it was like, okay, sounds reasonable. So the next three items, which is agricultural, cemeteries, and fraternity and sororities, that's kind of interesting. And I kind of had a bit of an education in terms of Ohio kind of land use law. So this is something that I asked Tim Gary to kind of look into and get back to me. But what Mark is suggesting, we have provisions for agricultural use, we have provisions for a cemetery, and we have fraternities and sororities. And obviously his argument is, hey, we don't really have these. Why isn't the ordinance? It's unnecessary, get rid of it. Now, coming from other states in a different country, there's at least what I thought, and again, it's definitely state by state, a common law principle where you have to provide for all reasonable uses. You may not have a use, but you still have to make provisions for it. Similar to what you see in a lot of the zoning ordinances where adult entertainment, and you have reams of text, sometimes 3-6 pages of policies. You may not have it in your municipality, but you have to provide if and so something occurs. And typically the default is like find an industrial area, portion of the city where we can allow it. So the question I posed to Tim Gary saying, hey, could we do this? And if we can, great, it's a no-brainer, it's an out-and-out prohibition. My only concern is that now, since I'm involved and I'm aware of these caveats of legal, I want our law department to rein in and make sure it's absolutely necessary. You do have out-and-out prohibitions already in your ordinance, but that's something where I would be kind of leery to recommend unless I had the backing of the law department.
So these are similar, he's recommending the same thing you just said with those other red items in the chart that have X's all the way through.
Correct, and that's kind of the thing.
That's
So
what you just
right,
said. Right.
right now, we have prohibitions on land use. So a car wash, a pawn shop,
So you
there's a
could
bunch of things.
easily add these and put an X
Very easy,
and just ask Tim Gary, we're doing this, is this legal in land use in the state of Ohio?
correct.
I can't answer the question, I don't have any idea. But it would seem like independent of this decision with Mark Reeves, shouldn't we be asking the question about the two that are in red that you have, that we?
Well, that's the thing,
So, I mean-
it brings up everything, but I'm not going to start digging up graves. So I'm saying right now, Mark is suggesting 3 uses that really have no use. So in fairness to Mark, good point. So I had to kind of research this and spending more time.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm not going to second guess what was done back in 2013, but obviously a decision was made to prohibit Class C, as the city defines it, retail. So this is something where a coworker brings up, I think it's a valid point, and if it's a legal point and our law department supports it, then we can do it.
I agree with that. Yeah, my agreement would be if Tim Gary says we can do it, why not just add it in our chart as X's? So that it helps our staffing know that somebody comes and wants to put a cemetery in, it's not acceptable. I don't know that, that's a big development item right now.
Thinking about throwing one in my backyard. All right.
So that basically hits those 3 uses. If we go down to 115109 recreational vehicles, his concern is that really, is it appropriate to have, and in particular, item C, in the zoning ordinance for something that deals with Norwood streets, which is the public right-of-way. So on one side, at least from my experience, is that typically zoning districts go to the center of the right-of-way, but the zoning ordinance regulates land use typically on private property. What Mark's, and again, he has a valid argument, saying the police, through the traffic code, is the best regulatory instrument to regulate whether it's parking, et cetera. So you wouldn't have parking standards for overnight parking or whatever. I think we had discussions recently going towards a 72-hour parking. That's under almost the traffic code, not the zoning ordinance. So Mark is making the same valid argument. Something like this, parking of trailers, boats, et cetera, really shouldn't be necessarily in the zoning ordinance.
Yeah. We'll have to have the safety service director have a discussion with the police department to find out about that, because I look at this and there's a reason why this was put in here. And maybe there was a loophole or something with that, so,
I'll look into that.
yeah, I understand the thought process behind your discussion or your point that's being made there. I'm not sure about that. Okay.
And then the last part, similar to the RMX zone, again, I've researched this. I can't find any history with regards to a parking overlay zone. I really don't know the history of it. Obviously, it goes back to amendments that was done in 2000. I don't know, maybe if it was the Cornerstone development or
It has
whatever.
more to do with Cornerstone.
Yeah, and maybe it was something that the then planning commission or council thought, okay, we need this policy, but it never came to fruition. or whatever. So it's one of these things, it could just be an orphan policy, and if that's the case, then it should just be stricken from the zoning ordinance.
Okay. Well, I do want to say I appreciate Mark Reeves' work on this. Definitely some interesting things for us to look at. I think for me, when I look at this as a new list of items for us to consider, I think what I would recommend is that we table these items right now. And the reason for that being that we already have quite a list that we've received from Mike for things to look at. And I would like to go through and get that item off of our agenda before we start working on something else, whether it be deserving of looking at or not. And I think that it is worth looking at. So that would be my recommendation with these items.
I agree.
I concur.
Okay. I'd like to have a
Agreed.
motion to table item C1B.
I'll second it.
Ms. Town, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
Mark will be so disappointed. Not really.
Okay, moving on to item C1C. This is from our previous discussion on front yard exterior fences and permeable paving, which was based on our previous work through what Mike had prepared. Mike, would you like to touch on this?
Sure. So if I could direct your attention to page 2, and then if you work your way halfway down on the right-hand side column. So hopefully I heard everyone correctly last time. So the fundamentals is that, there is an out-and-out concern. We just do not want to have fences in the front yard, period, end of discussion. For the exterior or secondary frontage, I think there's some potential for doing something creative that would allow some flexibility for the landowner to do some sort of fence, but under criteria. So there was a decent, healthy discussion last meeting. Hopefully I've heard that correctly, and items 1 through 5 are there to provide that guidance. And, Dan Bly definitely looked at this as well, and provided his, input for that. So at this point, I think, this was a major discussion of the group, so something where hopefully this comes closer to what you guys were anticipating.
This also was a lengthy discussion at BZA, where we gave Mike our comments also, so.
So his notes BZA agrees with?
Yes, this
Good.
is,
Okay.
BZA has made the recommendation to Mike. Mike had his own, he's talked to other people, whatever, so this is, now it's coming into planning, so.
Mike, when I read number 4 on that list, I'm a little confused about what that restriction means. Would you explain that to me?
Sure. So I'll read it for the this fence shall not extend beyond the existing building facade or footprint. So what I try doing, again, not just for that provision, on page 3 of 3, I provided a image of an existing house. And hopefully you can make out where in this image there is a projection where you have the midpoint, the gable, where it sticks out a bit further from the main house. And how this would apply is essentially, so whatever is the furthest part of the building closest to the road, that would be the footprint of the building. So sometimes you use the term facade. I think a lot of people associate facade with the front part. So I was trying to think of an appropriate word. Footprint came as being what is the outline of the current building. So whatever is facing closest out, that marks the limitation.
Okay.
So the house that we're looking at on Hudson and Forest would be permitted?
Well, no, and I use that for a couple of reasons. So I always start off with my biases or bigotry. So to me, what you see here, I would view it's perfectly fine in general. I would have no problem approving it if I was sitting in the BZA. However, the reality of this is that in this particular case, the fence is too high, and while it is still, let's say, maybe adhering to potentially the 3-foot setback from the sidewalk, what it doesn't conform to is trying to follow the building footprint. So you can kind of see where it is. It looks like probably another 20 feet it would have to go back.
Wow, they'd lose a lot of fenced yard. If you have children, that doesn't give you much of a backyard, a fenced-in backyard.
Well, correct, and I see that, but that's part, you know, I mean, we're great because I'm giving my bias, what I try not to do when I'm advising a body, but I'm just saying, in the city, you have very small lots. And when it comes to a corner lot, because you are identical to other municipalities across the country where you treat the frontage and the side front identical, that's where the rub is. So if you were Blue Ash, we wouldn't have been having the discussions. You probably would automatically meet these things. But there's definitely, and I've heard it since I've been here, a very strong concern that irrespective of that, that's the lot you bought. You know, you could have bought a bigger lot or somewhere else, or, you know, we just don't want to have it. So all I'm saying in this particular, I wanted to have an example that illustrates one of the fine line as to, and this doesn't illustrate, oh, this is something that meets it, this doesn't meet it. We could be very subjective and say, well, I still like it, but it circles back to, you know, discussions we had earlier. Ultimately, that will be at the discretion of the BZA. So they could, now obviously they probably did come to the BZA to get approval. So all we're doing right now is tweaking a bit further and saying if you wanted to replicate exactly what you saw here, you could have a nice white picket fence, but it has to be 4 feet, and you have to push it back probably another 15, 20 feet, and then it would be legal, according to our new standards.
What Mike has written is saying the staff can probably approve almost half of these.
Yeah.
So is that doing you a favor or not, the BZA a favor?
Oh, I think Mike is trying to find a way that, you know, for those people that have the lot, exactly what you articulated, that this would reduce the backyard to such a small area, why would they even invest in a fence? Because we're also wanting it to be architecturally pleasing. You know, so at the end of the day, they still, then Carrie or Mark would say, you have to now apply for BZA because it doesn't meet criteria or.
Okay.
Right.
But realize, the goal here was not to make it easier for the BZA. The goal was not the goal is to find something that's acceptable to community standards that we can say can be approved without community members having to jump through all these extra hoops to get there. Right now, they're jumping through extra hoops, and they're getting approved at times, but they have to jump through these extra hoops. And is that really necessary? We're trying to come up with some terminology that makes it acceptable.
And Vic, to add on what you just said, because I did approve that one, it's a public hearing, Jeannie. See, the minute it comes to BZA, that fence had to go in front of the neighbors, articulated exact what material, what height, and they had every option to say, no, this is silly, we don't want that.
So
And
do you agree with the wording and the verbiage of what he has written?
Very
Okay.
much so.
All right,
I think Mike's done a nice job.
okay.
Any additional discussion on front yard and exterior fences?
So from a staff point, is the staff allowed to approve 3, or is 4 going to take precedence? Because right now, we would approve any fence that would meet that projection that he's talking about in number 4. We would already do that as long as it did not extend beyond the farthest point of the house. But right now, this looks to me as a conflict. I don't know which I'm allowed to approve, because I couldn't approve 3 because it won't meet 4. Was that not appropriate? I apologize. I will withdraw the question.
Do you follow what she
Yeah, so I guess maybe how I would answer that is that the preceding sentence, when you read the last bottom, it's saying, and then it says the kicker is, and then comma, only in accordance to all of the following standards. So to me, it's all or nothing, I believe. So if staff gets a fence permit request and they can satisfy absolutely 1 through 5, staff can issue the permit.
3 and 4 seem to be directly conflicting to me, in direct conflict to the image that you show us, or them, I'm sorry.
Illegal right-of-way?
Well,
So
either,
you're saying that conflicts with 4, which has to do with the placement, the facade
so
shall not extend beyond.
4 says it cannot come out beyond the house, the farthest house or the footprint. Where 3 says it can be 3 feet from the property line or the legal right-of-way, which is going to be out past the house.
Depending on the corner lot.
Right. So 3 would approve the one we
I
have
think Carrie
here.
has a point there, Mike.
Well, that's the thing, but it was trying to work through.
And again,
the
I think
competing-
part of this might be, now that I'm kind of on the spot, because I did shake my head that I agree. Our original conversation had to do with the fence not going beyond the front facade.
Well, I
Carrie,
think that's what needs to say,
I
not
think it
just the
needs to have the word
facade.
front in front of facade, because
Right. That clarifies it.
that does clarify, Carrie, I appreciate bringing that up. Because now it's not in conflict. Because you can run along the right-of-way, or 3 foot off the right-of-way, and you're outside the limit, but not in the front.
Right.
It's
Okay.
a great point. I mean,
I see, yes, that one I understand.
Good thing we didn't make her withdraw that question.
It is. Okay, so we'll add the word front.
yes.
I believe we're all in agreement. Would ask Mike to prepare a draft legislation to that point. We'll have that for our next meeting. Also on this same topic is permeable paving. Being that
What is permeable, what are you talking about?
I've only heard about it once. Being that we just got a bit of an education on it, I would like to have some time to go through this and kind of contemplate on it before taking any action, but I'd be happy to entertain thoughts otherwise or additional discussion.
If I could just add a couple comments from the BZA's comments. BZA, after we went through this, we had an open discussion just so we could have a discussion among BZA. And we would support the Planning Commission looking at this because we do think there's some real value. The word that keeps coming up from the BZA members is an engineered system. In fact, we just heard some of that. In other words, this is not dumping gravel.
Correct.
And so anyway, it was very timely to have the presentation. So anyway, go ahead, Mike. That was the basic comments from the BZA to support. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll start off and this is directed to Dana. So I've probably sat through at least maybe half a dozen porous permeable pavings throughout my life. It's you're not a lay person because obviously you have some experience, but I don't think I've ever seen a decent, well put together presentation of that. So I appreciate that. And hopefully by flattering you, I can put the second thing do you know and have you seen provisions in other surrounding municipalities? Because, you do provide for draft ordinances, but I always like to use what's in the hood. What do other people are doing where I get to
Yes, please.
So is there any information you have of other municipalities that I could research or you could feed me that's doing this right now?
I could feed you that stuff. I just picked out stuff that was cherry picking it so it'd be kind of simple and easy for you guys. Because I think a lot of these other places, they had problems. Some of them did like incremental change and some of them did a big sea change where it was part of a green plan and a lot of other things. But I can send you that, and I can send you the digital file so you can maybe cut things out of that. But yeah, there's a lot of gateways to this stuff through sustainability initiatives. So that's what I've been using.
Yeah, I'm just presupposing, usually, whether I'm consulting over this group, they want to see who's doing something similar locally.
Locally.
Like,
Well, like the Civic Garden Center, they've actually got 3 different kinds of permeable pavement because they're actually testing it. And, they all seem to be wearing really well, but maybe I should get to whoever installed all of that and who they're working with. Maybe they're working with the manufacturer. Maybe they're working with DAP. I don't know. But I know that there's widespread use in those LA, Tybee Island, in
San Antonio.
San Antonio. Well, you've got the notes right there. So Minnesota, Milwaukee. Is it Milwaukee?
Well, that was my point of looking at this and looking through, and I sort of made note, she was talking about Tybee Island, and I'm thinking, oh, San Antonio, great, they've got it, and, then you've got another one, Los Angeles County, but all of those are climates that are nothing like in the Midwest, and all the challenges that come with all of this. And I thought, unless they show me one, and then I look over and it says Minneapolis, Minnesota, passed this in 2010. And it's like, well, yeah, they have some tough weather there, no doubt. So, and Fairway, Kansas. So there are communities much like ours that have the same challenges with freeze and thaw that have to do this. The biggest reason why, the reason why I took the 2 runners out of my driveway that had grass and put a concrete driveway in was because of ease of application. I'm never going to have to mess with that again. But there's different situations in this that absolutely apply. So it's interesting to see those, to look and see the different ordinances that were passed. And this was 2010. So as progressive as we are, we're apparently not that progressive. We're a little behind on some of this stuff.
I think you guys are doing great. I'm very grateful for the Stantons bringing this to the forefront. I really am.
And there was good discussion at BZA. I agree. I've sat in on that meeting. So there's a lot of
Thank you,
more
Mike.
discussion there. So we're gonna take this and consume, digest it, and then
Give Mike an opportunity to look whether or not we have any other communities that may be able to give us some guidance on what they've done working with Dana. And thank you, Dana, for the information today.
Well, and I think there was a discussion at the BZA. The discussion was maintenance of it, long-term maintenance, and how you make sure it's not, somebody says they want to put in this type of, and then they don't maintain it, and it's weeds coming up through it, and it looks terrible. That was a big concern. So, Mike, would you make that part of your sort of investigation? How are they being maintained? How are communities? Maybe a community has to put something in place, to some ordinance that says you're going to maintain it this way if you install it. So, okay, thank you.
Okay.
I wasn't here at the beginning. Am I allowed to say something when you guys were talking about the driveway?
Not at this time, no. Moving on to item C1D, selection of next zoning ordinance text priorities. I think we've already touched on one, asking for a draft fence ordinance to come back, and for some additional information on permeable paving, pardon me.
It's both.
Oh, I was half right.
Better than being half wrong.
Well, take what you can get sometimes. Anything else anybody would like to have added to that for our next discussion?
Now, are we talking about driveways with this, or what are we talking about?
Well, I think that would be part of our discussion. Is it limited to driveways? As Dana pointed out, some of it has ADA issues. Kind of a lot to digest there, where this would be allowed. Would it be strictly residential? Would we consider it in commercial areas? I think that's kind of all on the table. It being a new subject, I think it's kind of wide open.
So we're going to revisit the driveway situation, is what you're saying?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. But not limited just to that.
Okay.
Any other of Mike's suggestions that we want to be working on for the next one?
When's our meeting? Next meeting?
That will be the
May 4th?
Yes.
May 4th?
3:30 PM, same place, same time. I would make a motion that we adjourn.
Do you not want to do number
Oh,
3?
are we not doing number 3? What's number 3? Yeah, let's do number 3, sorry.
I was going to make a motion that we table number 3 in the interest of all of
That
us
sounds
concluding this meeting.
There's a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Oh, I second it.
Ms. Town, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Schneider. Would you like to table item number 3 to next meeting, sir?
Is that our question? Are we tabling this item 3 until the next meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
2 more items on here, which I will promise to make quick. Item E2, I would propose removing. Mike and I intend to work on that together. I don't believe we need additional work from the Planning Commission on that.
Is that a motion, sir?
Yes, ma'am. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Town, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
And finally, the last item on the agenda, I would move to adjourn at 5:42. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Town, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
We are adjourned.
Mike, thanks for all the information.
Yeah.
No problem. Very
Thank
helpful.
you all.